There are certain headlines that make you pause, tilt your head slightly, and wonder whether the world has quietly lost its sense of proportion. And this week's entry into that curious category involves Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, a humanitarian trip to Jordan, and, somehow, an alleged ripple of irritation inside the White House. Yes, apparently two people visiting refugee camps have, according to certain corners of the internet, managed to complicate the choreography of global military strategy. If that sounds slightly surreal to you, don't worry. Here on the Crown Talk UK, we're going to unpack it together. Now, on the surface, the trip itself looked almost textbook Sussex. Compassion, cameras, and a carefully framed humanitarian narrative. Harry and Meghan spent 2 days in Jordan, meeting Palestinian and Syrian refugees, highlighting healthcare access and the challenges facing displaced communities. It was organized with support from the World Health Organization, and the organization's leadership publicly thanked the couple for bringing attention to the issue. Even some longtime critics grudgingly admitted the visit itself was, well, fairly positive. Refugee healthcare getting global attention is rarely a bad thing. But of course, if you've followed the Sussex story for more than 5 minutes, you'll know that a quiet, drama-free headline simply will not do. Somewhere along the way, a report surfaced claiming that officials in Washington were less than thrilled about the timing. Why? Because during the same week that Harry and Meghan were walking through refugee facilities in Jordan, the United States was reportedly preparing a military strike against Iran. The alleged operation had the rather cinematic name Operation Epic Fury, and according to an anonymous source, always the most mysterious character in modern journalism, the Sussex presence in the region was described as inconvenient. Now, let's pause there for a moment, because timing and geography matter in stories like this. Harry and Meghan's visit reportedly concluded on the 26th. The strike, according to the circulating reports, took place on the 28th. And Jordan sits roughly 1,000 miles away from Iran. That's not exactly next door. So the suggestion that a humanitarian visit in Amman might disrupt a covert military operation 2 days later requires, shall we say, a fairly generous imagination. Still, once the phrase White House furious enters the media bloodstream, the story begins to grow legs of its own. Headlines start marching across social media, and suddenly what began as a speculative remark becomes the outline of a diplomatic drama. If you enjoy untangling stories like this, by the way, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Conversations like these are exactly what we explore here on the Crown Talk UK. To be fair, there is one practical point buried in the noise. High-profile public figures traveling in politically sensitive regions can create additional security considerations. Governments prefer fewer unpredictable variables when they're planning something as serious as military action. That's not entirely unreasonable. If a crisis erupts and 2 globally recognized celebrities happen to be nearby, suddenly there are new headlines, new risks, and new logistical headaches. But here's the ironic twist that makes this whole story wobble slightly on its axis. Harry and Meghan weren't acting as diplomats. They weren't negotiating policy or representing the British government. They were essentially acting as high-profile advocates on a humanitarian visit connected to the World Health Organization. Celebrities, activists, and public figures make trips like this all the time. The difference, of course, is that very few of them attract the same gravitational pull of controversy. And that's where the Sussex phenomenon really becomes fascinating. No matter what the couple does, interviews, documentaries, charity work, podcasts, the reaction almost always splits into 2 familiar camps. One group sees a pair trying to carve out a global humanitarian role beyond the royal institution. The other sees 2 media-savvy celebrities staging carefully curated public appearances. And once those 2 interpretations collide online, the debate practically fuels itself. What makes this particular story so oddly amusing is that even critics who are usually skeptical about the Sussex brand admitted the Jordan visit itself was beneficial. Refugee communities gained visibility. Health organizations received media attention. The humanitarian conversation expanded, at least briefly.
Those outcomes are objectively positive, yet somehow the narrative still spiraled into geopolitical intrigue involving military operations and anonymous sources whispering about inconvenience. And perhaps that tells us something larger about the modern media ecosystem. In today's news cycle, almost any event can be reshaped into controversy if the framing is dramatic enough. A humanitarian visit becomes a diplomatic distraction. A refugee clinic becomes the backdrop to military speculation. And two public figures meeting displaced families somehow end up woven into the storyline of international strategy. So what's the real lesson here? Probably this. When it comes to Harry and Meghan, the story is rarely just the story. Their presence alone seems to act like a magnet for interpretation, projection, and occasionally a dash of creative storytelling. Whether you see them as humanitarians, celebrities, disruptors, or simply two people navigating life outside the royal system, one thing is certain. Even a two-day visit